Hello and welcome to my first 5 years Instagram Live. And today Jenny is here. You might be able to see her and doing some magic moving in the bottom because today we've got a guest joining us for an Instagram Live. We're going to be joined by Kidvelo and we're going to be talking all about learning to ride a bike, which I think is a rite of passage for most children. But then Karen's going to chat to us about how she advises that we do learn to ride a bike, and also whether we need to drop the idea of using stabilisers. And again, stabilisers were a thing that featured massively in my youth when I was learning to ride my bike. My grifter definitely had stabilisers on it back in the late 70s. And I think of my 3 boys, our eldest learned with stabilisers, but by the time the other 2 were learning, I think we ditched the stabilisers and just did the running behind, holding onto the seat bit. So we're going to think about what's the most effective way to teach your child to ride a bike, but also the skills that you need to help you to be able to sit on a bike and balance. So all that kind of gross motor and control of your body. Because if you think about when you are pedaling along, you're moving your legs, you're engaging your core, you're using your upper body, your chest and your shoulders, you're having a grip with your hands, you're constantly adjusting your centre of gravity as the bike's going up and down and round. You're using all your senses in terms of your eyes and your ears, and so there's an awful lot going on just from that simple act of trying to ride a bike, never mind negotiating obstacles. So yeah, in terms of development, there's a huge amount of processing that's taken place to what becomes a really automatic skill. I suppose much like us as adults, when we come to do things like driving a car, when you first start, it's really difficult, but then it becomes dead automatic. Now, I can see Karen has joined us, as has my own assistant, but also managed to chop our heads off, which is good. So, hello Karen, welcome. We're just going to see if Jenny can manage to find our heads.
It was fine until we joined us, Karen.
I thought it was me. Oh, hello. The modern technology we have.
That's it. So,
never let Jenny near the modern
yeah,
technology.
it's normally me that does the technology, but we thought Jenny could have a try today, but yeah, it won't happen again. So before we get going, Karen, if it's all right, we'll just introduce ourselves so everybody watching knows who we are, and then, well, obviously we want to hear what you've got to say about learning to ride a bike, and we've also got some questions, some that have come in advance, and some that might come in during our conversation. So, welcome officially to my first 5 years Instagram Live with Karen from Kidvelo. I'm Alice Bryce-Clegg. I'm one of the co-founders of my first 5 years.
And I'm Jenny Johnson, the not-so-able assistant. I'm not doing the tech again. It kept ignoring the invite request. Hi, Karen. Maybe introduce yourself as well.
Well, obviously I'm better at making balance bikes than I am at tech, so I feel your pain, Jenny. But yeah, I'm one of the co-founders of a new balance bike brand, Kidvelo, but we're not really new to the industry. We've been early adopters, if you like, of balance bikes for, I think my children started 13 years ago on them. And back then, they were very much a sort of wooden toy. They weren't really seen as a way of learning to ride. They were just another additional toy. But we found a couple for my children who at the time were 18 months and 4 years and really struggling on stabilisers. I don't know how any parent copes with 2 under 4-year-olds and trying to get them from A to B using bikes without, pushing a buggy and coping with the child on stabilisers up and down curbs. Our journey didn't finish there though. We then started selling balance bikes from home around the kitchen table. And we then eventually became the distributors for a brand called Strider, which we ran for the best part of 6 or 7 years. But at the back end of 2019, we'd spent so many years racing children on balance bikes, distributing thousands of bikes, talking to parents that we had very clear ideas about what we wanted to improve and what we wanted to do. So at the beginning of COVID, we made a brave decision to cancel our distribution contract and all join forces to produce our own range of balance bikes, as you can see. So between us, the other co-founders, there's over 40 years experience in just specialising in balance bikes. So I guess we know a thing or two about them.
That's really amazing.
Yeah.
I didn't actually know the backstory there. I thought you were much newer into the market than that. And you're right, many years ago, balance bikes were not really a thing.
I just wondered, let's start with that simple question, which is what's the difference between a bike, as lots of parents watching will understand it, and a balance bike? What has a balance bike got and not got that a bike has?
Yeah, well, the simple thing is about a balance bike is it doesn't have any pedals, it doesn't have a crank or a drivetrain. So as you can see, if I just pinch this one carefully prepared here, I don't know how much you can see that there's actually nothing in this area that allows the child to pedal. So how they use them is, the concept's very simple, and they have literally a handlebar. They have 2 wheels, a frame, and nothing complicated. Because remember, we're dealing with 1 to 2 year old children, and as you know, Alistair and Jenny, that their patience and their ability to take on too many skills at once is quite limited, which is to be expected of that age group. So a pedal bike, which was always the traditional way of learning to ride. I don't know if you learned to ride on stabilisers, but most of us of our generation do remember that sort of rocky moment on stabilisers and the minute you took them off. A balance bike grasps the key skill needed to ride a bike first, which is balance. And balance is actually really quite a complicated skill to learn. And so it's best achieved by removing all the other complications such as brakes and pedalling and trying to steer. And traditionally, bikes with stabilisers tend to be quite heavy. Because they're sort of the first entry level bike, parents don't tend to want to spend a fortune on them, so they tend to be sort of quite cheap steel bikes, and as a result they're far too heavy. I mean, some of the bikes with stabilisers we're seeing are sort of 8 kilos, which for a really small 18-month-old child is just too heavy. Yeah. So your average balance bike is anywhere between sort of 2.9, I think we're one of the lightest one with air tyres, and they can be up to sort of 4.5, 5 kilos, but they're getting a little bit too heavy at that stage. But the concept's really simple. They grasp the handlebars, their feet are flat on the floor so that they're very stable, they're in control. And as any parent knows, if a toddler feels safe and they can be encouraged, they're happy, and they tend to then just grasp the concept. And the nice thing about a balance bike is that they'll only go as fast as they want to go. So the whole point of this balance bike is to teach the balance required to then move on to a pedal bike. And actually, we've been teaching this the wrong way round for generations. You know, we concentrating on steering and pedaling and using the stabilisers to keep the balance, i.e. the bike upright. But the balance bike strips the whole process back around the other way. So you start by learning the balance, and then when the balance is actually achieved and they're confident and they're happy, then you can transition up to a bike with pedals.
I have to say, Karen, that we have direct experience of this. So both for myself, so I have 3 girls, 2 of them are older, so one's 24, the other's 20. And they learned to ride a bike the traditional way, which was that they had a bright pink bike with all the bits and pieces coming off it and the rocky stabilisers. And it took absolutely forever for them to become confident.
Problem. You know, you have a bike with stabilisers, and because the child hasn't actually, you know, experienced balancing for themselves, because that's the whole point of these 2 little wheels we put on the back. Yeah. The minute you take the stabilisers off, you're back at square one. You know,
absolutely.
You know,
absolutely. With the little one, with Olivia, who's now only 11, so I have the sort of wisdom of a decade's experience before we tried getting her onto a bike. We did the balance bike thing from very early on. So the other hat I used to wear is that I owned a nursery group, and we introduced balance bikes from age 1 upwards, and we found that children were really competent very, very quickly on whizzing around on these balance bikes. So we actually introduced something called Bike School, and we had this really simple program which started off with children showing an interest in the balance bikes, getting really confident on the balance bikes and whizzing around and gliding and stopping and sort of weaving around obstacles and things. And then there just became an apparent moment to introduce the bike, and I was wondering whether you could maybe, I'm sure there's more science around it than an apparent moment, so maybe you could tell us when that typically is.
Yeah, well, look, you know, you hit the nail on the head. It's all about confidence, you know, and there are various age points you can start riding a balance bike. I mean, the key age for us is about 18 months. You know, that's the age that they competently can handle the bike. But then again, you can start at 4. We're bringing out some bikes later in the year that you can start at 5, 6, because obviously there's a lot of children with autism and dyspraxia that perhaps need to start the journey a little later. But the key to moving on is exactly that, it's confidence. So our trick that we use, we supported cycling instructors for years using our bikes and written lesson plans and various key things. And one of the things I'm always looking for is their ability to have their feet up, because obviously by lifting their feet, they've removed their anchor point to the ground. So if they can use the balance bike, and I mean properly by turning and weaving and being able to actually ride the bike with their feet up, and on a Kidvelo we have a footrest so that they've got somewhere to put their feet when they're coasting. But if they can lift their feet and they can keep their feet up off the ground and still competently steer their bike for about 10 seconds or more, then they're more than ready to move on to a pedal bike. That being said, you know, there are times that you'll find that even though you can put them onto a pedal bike, and I still remember my child, you know, my youngest, he was 2 years, 9 months on the day that we literally took him off his balance bike onto a pedal bike and he just cycled off. And I've heard thousands of stories that people can do this, you know.
Yeah.
And that seems to be the key crossover point. But also remember that, you know, a balance bike's a lot lighter, it's a lot easier for parents to carry, and it's a lot of fun. You know, the kids can go quicker, they feel safer, they're much more confident with it. So you'll find that there's also a crossover time where they could pedal a bike, and if you're going on a family bike ride, then obviously a pedal bike's the ideal choice to use. But if you want to just throw something in the car to go down to the park and catch up with friends, keep the balance bike around, because they will often overlap and use both for as long as they'll fit on their balance bike.
I think the weight of the bike is really important as well, because I've got 3 boys now, young men, but my boys were born fairly close together, which looking back was both careless and unnecessary. But so many times we would go out on the bike and then be like, oh, my legs are tired, I don't want to cycle back. So you find yourself with kind of a buggy and a papoose and trying to carry a massive bike with pedals sticking out of it. So
I mean, that's the nice thing about balance bike. You know, I mean, I found it particularly useful when I had a child in a pushchair as well as a child learning to ride a bike. Because, you know, the thing is that their concentration spans are a lot shorter than perhaps going for an hour ride on your balance bike around the park, you know, if you're catching up with friends and having a picnic. But it means you can put it on the back of the buggy and the child can run off and play on the swings or do whatever they want to do. I also found it really useful for doing the nursery school run. So I'd have one child on the balance bike and they can negotiate curbs themselves. I mean, obviously you need to get the instructions to stop and not let them go
Stop at the road.
Yeah, you know, there's all of that sort of stuff. But then it was easy. We got to school a lot quicker, which if anybody's like me in the mornings is an absolute godsend. But then it meant I could just put the balance bike on the back of the buggy in the pushchair and just walk it back home again. You know, because one of the big issues we've got is that a lot of schools don't have adequate bike secure parking, you know. So it's nice just to have a tool that you can just use to take back to school to pick them back up again so they'll ride home again. But because they're so simple, they also fold really easily into the back of the car. So if you're going on a camping trip, for example, you know, the balance bike will just fit on top of all the multitude of other tons of gear that I seem to have to take anyway. But, you know, so it's got a multitude of uses. But the biggest thing about the weight is that you've got to remember that these are really small little children that are riding these things. And every gram that you can shave off it is better for them. They can lift the bike over obstacles, they can turn it, and it's their bike. They can do it all independently, which I'm sure Alistair would agree. You know, the more independence or feel of independence you can give a toddler, the better it is for their progression and their confidence.
Absolutely. And also, if they do take a tumble, you don't want a great big heavy bike frame falling on top of your child.
Well, that's the thing. You know, I mean, there's a thing in the industry called a steering limiter, which basically is a little limiter that limits the amount of turn that you can put in a handlebar. Now, we don't use them at Kidvelo because we believe that actually it's really good for a child to be able to fully feel the movement of that turn so that they learn for themselves how to corner. But the other advantage of it is like I say, without a steering limiter, when the bike does fall, and they will have tumbles, you know, they're kids, there's nothing that then remains sticking out for them to land on and hurt themselves. You know, the bike handlebars will fold in line flat with the frame of the bike, and there's nothing to hurt. Whereas if you come off a bike with stabilisers, you've got handlebars sticking out, you've got stabilisers to land on, you've got pedals you can fall onto, and the minute they get a knock in their confidence, it does set you back a little bit. Absolutely. But that's not to say this is a race, you know. I mean, it really doesn't matter at what stage your child moves on to a pedal bike. You know, it's all about making sure they enjoy it so that they develop a lifelong love for cycling and being outdoors.
So in terms of practicalities then, for anybody who's looking for a balance bike, obviously you can see from the one you showed, the seat is adjustable. So the idea is that if your child is sitting on it, their feet are flat on the floor, so not kind of on their toes, on flat feet. Are there any brakes, or are you adjusting your speed by basically using your feet?
Yeah, so the safest way to stop with a balance bike is by using your feet. And if you think about how you ride as an adult, if your brakes were to fail, you'd stop with your feet. It's an instinctive thing to do. Now, it does depend on the age you're starting. We don't put brakes on our little rookie 12 because we aim that at sort of your starting point at 18 months. And the problem with lever handlebar brakes is that we've actually witnessed this for ourselves when we've raced kids on these types of bikes, that they actually can't reach the levers, or they haven't got the strength, or they haven't actually got a quick enough coordination to spot danger, think I've got to slow down, pull the lever. There's a lot of things going on, whereas just putting feet back down is dead easy. That's not to say, though, that a child starting at sort of 3 and 4 years old wouldn't be able to handle a front lever brake. You know, they've got more development, they've got more skills, more awareness. So on our next bikes up, which is a 14-inch, and those start in balance mode and actually move, you can put a pedal kit onto it, so it transforms into a really lightweight pedal bike as well. But on those, we would endorse front lever brakes because of the age of the child. So yeah, it comes down to the development, really, and making sure that what you're choosing is the right stage for your child.
You just talked about development there, and I'm going to sort of flip over to Alistair, because one of the things that massively intrigues me is what is going on when a child is riding a bike, and there's just so much. I just thought it was worth exploring that from a child development point of view.
We talked about this a little bit when you were trying to press the buttons at the beginning. It is, but it is from all the kind of sensory motor things that are going on, so how your brain is processing, the fact your inner ear is looking at your balance and your vestibular system, the fact that children develop this idea of proprioception, so how they control their body in the space that they've got. And to be able to coordinate your body in the way that you would to be able to ride a bike, you've got to have control over your gross motor muscles. So you've got to use them a lot to understand what they are and how they work, because you're not just flailing your arms and legs about, you're actually controlling your legs and arms in quite a systematic way. So yeah, as Karen was saying, that whole idea of being able to develop balance and confidence being king and queen when it comes to children's ability to do anything, that when you're not having to worry about the balance because your feet are lifted off the ground on pedals, and the pedaling and the brakes and the handlebars, as well as all the looking and listening, that's why it makes really good developmental sense to start with a frame that supports your body, that lets you feel secure. And then obviously when you feel really secure with it and you've been able to practice and assimilate all of those other sensory development aspects, you can then lift your feet. You know, and I imagine children do it very briefly at first, a little bit of wobble, and then you get more confidence. And you can see how that clearly and easily transitions you then onto using pedals, because then you just begin to think about how the pedals drive the bike forward. You're not thinking about all of the other developmental stuff that's going on.
Yeah, and like I say, you know, the pedaling is really easy. But, you know, instead of using their feet to walk or run the bike, they're turning a pedal, and it takes them seconds. You know, they'll have a few missed pedals, they'll miss the pedal, or their foot will slide off. It really doesn't take very long to grasp that concept at all.
And we have had a couple of questions that have come in that we're going to ask you about, but can I just ask about helmets, because that's I think a question that will be in lots of parents' heads.
Yeah. If
you are on a balance bike, does it depend, do you need a helmet, or does it depend what age you are, or do you always recommend that you wear a helmet?
I'm a massive believer in helmets. I believe that they should be worn from the minute you first take the bike outside, not necessarily because they're going to crash on day one, but it gets the child into an understanding that if they have their bike, they also wear their helmet. It's a bit like going for a walk, you put your shoes on. The more natural you can make it at an early age, the better. But there are, again, you know, with helmets, a massive variety of different helmets out there. And one thing I always suggest is go for super light helmets, because child's neck muscles are really not very strong. We used to, as I say, race kids. I mean, I've raced them over the finish line of the Professional Tour of Britain, for example. I've raced 300 two-year-olds all at the same time. I'm not
Well, that was fun.
by that one again. But actually, because of that, I've seen a huge variety of different helmets out there. So the secret to a helmet, I mean, we stock the Crotoni, which is a German brand. The reason I love this helmet, it's 220 grams. It is so light, but it's actually one of the safest, you know, being a German manufacturer. It exceeds all the safety standards. But the secret is to make sure it fits. You know, if you have a helmet that doesn't fit correctly, you potentially can do more damage to your child when they have an accident than, you know, ensuring it's the right fit. So making sure the straps are done up. And I'm actually going to be writing a blog post and producing a video on how to fit a helmet properly. It's one of my bugbears, alongside seeing kids on stabilisers, I'm biting my tongue. It's also seeing helmets that are just, frankly, the wrong type of helmet. You know, the thing about kids' helmets is that there's huge variety. You know, some are marketed for mountain biking, downhill. At the end of the day, you just want a really good CE safety approved helmet that's super light, that will adjust in the colour that they like. You know, I mean, we like these. We've got about 10 different shades, and they match all the bikes, and they're nice and vibrant. It's got removable visors. But, you know, any of that really doesn't matter. As long as it's safety approved for use in the UK, and we have much higher standards here in Europe than we perhaps do in other parts of the world. So you want to make sure that you're buying the correct size helmet. They're very simple to measure. You literally get a tape measure, measure around the circumference of the head, and then buy the helmet to fit that circumference now. Do not allow room for growth. If you have a helmet that's too big, it will slide backwards. It can cause entanglement and entrapment issues. And the other thing about a helmet, unless you're using one that has a magnetic clasp on the chin, all other helmets are not designed for playing. So if you're going to go on the swings, or you're going to go and slide down a slide and you've just got to the part, take the helmet off before you allow your child to play. They're important for use in cycling, but not for anything else.
That's really, really interesting. I'm going to flip to one of the questions that we've had. And this is a child that's become totally dependent on stabilisers. Okay. And parents are finding it impossible now for them to get the sort of overconfident with the stabilisers, but not interested in trying the bike without them. So yeah. I get that problem, because I had that with my first two. What were your thoughts? And it took weeks and weeks and weeks to get the stabilisers off the bikes. It
obviously, without knowing the age of the child we're talking about.
Oh, 5-year-old, sorry, I should have said.
Okay, so 5-year-old. So obviously, if the bike is relatively light and it's comfortable, I appreciate that a parent of a 5-year-old doesn't necessarily want to go and buy a balance bike and start from the beginning. The other way of doing it is to take the pedals off the bike that they've got at the moment, and providing you get the seat low enough, which is obviously a big problem with this type of approach, because you've got to be able to have feet flat on the floor and a bend in the knee so they can physically maneuver it along. I've had success doing that before. So, you know, with a 5-year-old, they can grasp the concept relatively quickly compared to a younger child. Yeah. Take the pedals off, take the crank and the drive chain, the chain off, reduce as much weight as possible, get rid of baskets and tassels and all the other glam and glitz and bling that sometimes get put on this stuff. Strip it down to the bare basics, or worst case, you know, go to the tip shop and buy the cheapest bike that you can get, just to literally plagiarize into a balance bike, and try them that way. Because I think you'll find that the confidence that they then get from being able to move this bike along at a speed that they want to put the pedals back on at that sort of age group is certainly possible to do. So they can keep their same bike, but they won't notice if you take the pedals and the stabilisers all off necessarily. They'll still be able to work out how to manoeuvre it along. Like I said at the beginning, you know, there are kids with conditions that really do struggle with the whole concept of balance, you know, dyspraxia, autism, hypermobility, low muscle tone, all of this sort of stuff. And that's the reason we brought out the next balance bikes, you know, because for a child of 5 and 6, there really isn't very many options out there at all. So we also get that actually the balance process for a child of that age, learning that part, is relatively short compared to the time span they would want to be riding a bike. So we've given you both modes. We've given you a bike that works beautifully as a balance bike, but also when you bolt the pedal kit on, it transforms into a really lightweight pedal bike. So our 14-inch is like 6 kilos with the pedals on, which is up there with some of the really top, you know, brands that are like twice as expensive as what we're trying to achieve. But it gives parents the best of both modes. You can buy one bike and do both.
I was going to ask you whether it was myth and legend or whether it was truth that you could take pedals off a normal bike, because I've heard somebody else suggest that.
There's issues with doing it. I mean,
yeah, I think it's a really good idea.
Yeah, it's not ideal. And mainly because if you think about pedals, your seat height is a lot higher to be able to put your feet onto pedals than if you have your feet on the ground. And majority of the geometry of pedal bikes are not designed to have your feet flat on the ground. You know, you cannot get that seat low enough. And if your child's up on tippy toes on the seat, then it's actually not going to help you because they can't move it along. They're just going to totter and fall over. So if you can get the seat low enough to do it, it will work as a short stop. I wouldn't encourage it for a child that has never ridden a bike before. But, you know, I'm a mum to 2. We're all facing a massive cost of living crisis. I'm not going to sit here and say, scrap the bike you've got and go and buy something completely different. But if you've got conditions or you've got reasons why they absolutely hate the bike that they're on, I guarantee you it's because it's too heavy, it's too frustrating, it doesn't allow them any confidence, and it's actually not teaching them balance, and they don't feel safe on it. You know, something that's heavy, they just don't feel confident on it.
So the clue, basically, to summarise, is in the name, is all about balance. So just another a question over to you is just about other things that we can do before the balance bike's even a feature around balance and getting ready for that sort of first introduction to a balance bike. What other things might we be doing?
Yeah, and a lot of things children will do naturally in terms of developing their balance, because gross motor physical play, putting yourself into situations where you're using your whole body, means that you have to really use your sense of balance. So a lot of that will happen outside, so either in the garden or outdoor space, in the park. It doesn't necessarily have to be on play equipment. Even just jumping between logs, or even when you do that thing where you walk along the curb and pretend you're on a tightrope, or you're walking over pavement and not standing on the cracks. All the idea that you are moving your body in a gross motor way really helps to develop your balance. But also, your inner ear and your vestibular system also develops when you are moving your head about. So things like hanging upside down, swinging, when children love to do that thing where they're on swings and they lean back, all that adjusting of your head through other movement all affects the development or supports the development of your inner ear. So to get really good at balancing, you don't necessarily have to be on high bars or tight ropes or anything like that. It can just be playing games where you are using your big gross motor physicality in a variety of ways, or moving your head into different positions in various games. Even things like rolling down a hill is really good for developing balance. So anything that's gross motor, even if you are indoors, you can play games using your sofa cushions, where you're jumping over those or onto those or crawling through those. So anything that gets children moving, really good for developing balance.
And I think just beginning to wrap up now, Karen, I just really reinforce, having ran this bike school across 8 different nurseries and helped hundreds and hundreds of children to learn to ride a bike at a very young age. You know, typically when they were 3-4 years old, they were competently riding a pedal bike. It was all about getting them to be really competent on the balance bike itself and have that confidence that they can lift the legs in the air and whee, and they're staying balanced. And as you say, if you leave it long enough, if you're patient and wait till they're absolutely ready, and I can vouch for my third daughter and all hundreds of children that we helped to learn to ride a bike at my nursery group. It was minutes. When you waited for the right time to introduce the bike and the pedals, it was a matter of moments. It was always done within the session. And I just think, like you say, ditch the stabilisers. Let's get rid of stabilisers. Let's focus on that balance first. But I think we'll have to wrap it up there, Karen. We're going to pop some information in the bio. I know you've done a leaflet that parents can download. I also know you've got an offer on at the moment, a 15% discount. So we're going to share that in our what do they call them, the stories, so parents that might be interested can also benefit from that. So I've really enjoyed listening to you, and I hope that parents out there, because every child wants to ride a bike, it's sort of a rite of passage, and I think if we can ditch the stabilisers and start to really focus on balance, then hopefully lots more children will be enjoying it, and lots of parents will be saving their backs, because there's nothing more difficult than running around bent over trying to hold the bike.
It's terrific. I mean, the only thing I would add is that, you know, I do hear from parents that say my child is not getting on with a balance bike, and actually when you drill into it, the reasons being is they're not giving them enough little and short opportunities to ride. If you get it out once a month and you expect them to do half an hour intensive balance biking, it won't work. Keep it lying around the house, keep it lying around the garden, just let them pick it up, use it as and when they want to, and then you will find success with them. And if anybody's struggling, hit me up in messages, send me an email, whatever, and I'll happily help you out.
That's really helpful.
Yeah, I completely agree. We had it as what we call continuous provision. So it was always there, it was always available, and children could dip in and out of using that bike anytime they wanted. I'm going to have to stand up now to walk over to the phone, which is about 2 meters away, to press the end of live. So I'm not walking off in a strop.
That's okay.
Well, thank you ever so much for joining us. It's been really informative.
Well, no, thank you for having me. It's a really valuable key skill, you know, and it's not just about becoming the next Bradley Wiggins. As Alistair said, balance is used in everything: walking, climbing, running, gymnastics, everything. So it's a real key skill to learn. But thank you for having me.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, everybody.
Take care. Bye.
See you next
Bye.
time.